From our studios this time in Las Vegas and Tampa, this is Green Tagged Theme Park in 30. I'm Philip, and I'm joined, as always, with my co-host, Scott Swenson of Scott Swenson Creative Development. I'm in Vegas for LDI, which is happening this coming week, which is used to conflict with IAPA, but now they're separate. But it's for all the lighting designers in themed entertainment and beyond. Every type of lighting. So maybe next week we'll talk about that. But
you are so tired. I can just lighting designers for the entertainment industry or for the attractions industry and beyond.
Yes, I'm basically sleepwalking or sleep talking. Is that a thing?
This could be a great show.
It is now. Show. It's a thing now. All right. Universal Studios Hollywood announced their 2025 calendar of events, and we got some interesting information on this calendar of events I thought we would maybe just look at. So first, of course, is that the FanFest nights is coming in April 25th through May 18th. We've talked about that before, where it's different IPs, and in my view, it's kind of like a Halloween Horror Nights type event, but not horror based. It is other IP based. So I think I'm really excited about this. I'm really interested to see how they execute it, but it's coming up in April, which is almost a month run, which I think is pretty good for a first year event. And then Halloween Horror Nights is on here from September 4th through November 2nd, which is basically, I think, the same footprint they had this year, because this year it was that same weekend. So it doesn't seem like they're adding any dates to Halloween Horror Nights. They're just keeping it the same time in there. But the rest of the things that were interesting to me in this calendar is the events that are like made up that have to relate to. So they have Butterbeer season, Back to Hogwarts, that the Passember Park days, which they're treating like holidays. I don't know. What do you think of this, Scott?
Oh, I think it makes total sense. I think the idea of, Back to Hogwarts during the back to school time makes tons of sense. Butterbeer season, that's in the spring. That's normally when most parks do like a beer fest. So instead of doing, like zoos will do, Brewfari or Bands Brew and Barbecue like we used to do at Busch, they're doing Butterbeer. It's to me, it's almost like they're doing a parody of what other parks do as seasonal events, which I think is really kind of clever. Instead of back to school, it's back to Hogwarts. I think that's neat, playing upon their, as you say, playing upon their IPs. And the whole FanFest thing, like I call it, it's IP pop-ups, which just makes total sense. And they'll get all kinds of data as to what are the most popular with their crowds, and will those parlay perhaps into permanent installations in the future, or is it something that they want to at least pursue? I'm a huge fan of festivals. Create a festival. I've said it a gazillion times. If you have a major park that's open year round and you're not doing at least 4 festivals, you're leaving money on the table. Yeah. So in this, they're doing significantly more than that. And they've, as you say, have kind of invented some holidays or invented festivals based solely on their IP. So like I said, to me, it almost reads like, okay, well, everybody else does a beer fest. What is something we can do that nobody else can do? Butterbeer, perfect. And instead of doing a back to school thing, let's do the school that we are most known for. Let's do Back to Hogwarts. So yeah, it all just kind of makes sense. It's not like they're completely random. It's just that they're Universal's take. They're taking great advice, and that is to create something that only your park can do, and make it your own, so that nobody else will compete with you. So yeah, I think it's a neat idea.
There is an event on here that has not been announced at all. It's literally just called New Summer Event. So that's quite the placeholder, I guess, to just say New Summer Event in here.
And I have two theories on that. That could either be, and it most likely is, they just don't have it quite buttoned up yet. Or since it is Universal, it could also be that they're still in negotiation for some sort of IP. To be able to use that some sort of IP. That is not uncommon either, and certainly not with Universal, which is very IP heavy. So,
what do you think of the timing of FanFest nights? So, April 25th through May 18th. I think it's good that it's more than 1 week. I mean, if you remember when Disney tried, the After Dark events like Pride Nights, Pride Nights is still, even this year, Disney released their calendar, and this year it's still only 2 nights, even though they sell out. But they've expanded, a Sweetheart Nights and some of the other weird things. So on the one hand, I think it's good that FanFest Nights is starting with 3 weeks, and we don't know how many days in that 3 weeks, but it's fair to assume, or I would at least assume, 2 nights a week. So I think we're thinking at least 6 nights, or 5 or 6 nights that they're offering this, which is, I think, a decent run for a new ticket event. But the timing of it makes it, I mean, that's still a shoulder season, right? April 20th to May 18th. It's right before. Yeah.
Is it a shoulder season or is it spring break? That I don't know.
I think
it's close to spring break. I don't know. Of course, spring breaks are different county by county around the country, but
it's right. I think it's right after spring break. So spring break for many schools in California is April 14th to the 21st. So it is the week after spring break, up to almost before school lets out. So it's yeah.
Yeah, it kind of makes sense to me, I guess, because if I thought it was unusual if it was during spring break, because that would be
why do it then? Because you already have people coming to the park.
Exactly.
Yeah. So it must be,
however,
like a shoulder month essentially that they're still trying to fill for that.
Right. Yeah. This year, let's see. First week of March into mid-April in Florida. So yeah, it's right after spring break. So maybe it's a way to extend their spring break season. So it does become a shoulder season.
Yeah.
It's kind of cool.
Yeah, right. Basically,
I doubt that it's going to be every night. I doubt that it's going to be every night because they're going to need time to do changeovers because they're doing multiple IPs throughout the course of that FanFest experience, which I think is kind of fun.
Yeah.
So
okay, well, interesting. So I think we'll be on the lookout to see what the new summer event is, and then I'm sure we'll get more details. So it's interesting. FanFest really is not that far away. Now we look at it on the calendar, April 25th. It's already December. So, but we don't have any details about anything besides just that the related IPs, right? Which we talked about before. So it'll be interesting when that's finally actually announced. Okay. So the next story is Busch Gardens Tampa, and they're facing a multi-million-dollar verdict in an injury case that happened during Howl-O-Scream in 2022. So a jury in Florida has ordered United Parks to pay about $5 million to the family of a 12-year-old boy who was injured during Howl-O-Scream at Busch Gardens Tampa in 2022. A Hillsborough County jury decided last week that Busch Gardens owner United Parks is liable for just over $5 million to compensate the 12-year-old for injuries he sustained after falling off a trampoline in the park's Stanleyville Theater. So if you thought this was actually related to Howl-O-Scream, you were mistaken. So the doors of the theater had not been locked, allowing the boy to enter and access the acrobatic trampoline on the stage. The lawsuit also claimed that the boy fell off of the trampoline onto a metal object, lacerating his right kidney, among other injuries. The boy lost the use of the kidney, which is really bad. He'll need kidney treatments for the rest of his life. So the jury also found the boy's family partially responsible for the incident, which limited United Parks' liability to 65% of what the jury determined were more than $8 million in damages. So I think this is interesting because, as Robert over at Theme Park Insider pointed out, it hardly ever gets this far in the theme park. It usually settles and then we have NDAs and we don't hear anything about anything in this. But this one, to make it all the way through the jury, which means that a lot of the records are released, which is why we know what happened. I'm assuming it got that far because the park thought they would win because it is essentially, a kid that's going into an area you're not supposed to be in. That's, cast only off limit area to get on a trampoline that's not in use. During an area that's not in use, it's just that the door was unlocked. But I'm sure we don't have the exact details, but I'm sure that what they were going to say is there's a due diligence that is required here, a due diligence to make sure that your, cast only areas are locked or guarded in some way. Scott. But you know what, Scott? You have worked with with these parks, so you tell me what you think.
Well, so what I want people to understand is it is stuff like this that makes it so that your theme park tickets are now skyrocketing in price.
That's true.
It is this kind of, in my opinion, stupidity that is really hurting the industry as a whole. Because what it does, and don't misunderstand me, I feel sorry for the child. I am sorry that he will be either on dialysis or searching for a kidney the rest of his life. I think that's terrible. However, as you say, he went into a building that was not in use. Actually, it probably was in use. It was probably between shows because they did do that the Dark Circus in that space. Yeah. But he went into a space that was not in use, onto a stage, because the trampoline wasn't just out in the house.
Yeah.
He went onto a stage, which I would put dollars to donuts, that had signs that said, please stay off the stage, do not enter the stage, blah, 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 blah. And then started playing with equipment that was clearly not for guest use. And even if it was, for performer use, it was between shows, so chances are good it wasn't properly set up.
Yeah.
So, and now it's going to, cost the park a ton of money and a lot of embarrassment in the news media. I'm not a lawyer, so I can't talk about legal, but just logic versus law. In logic versus law, this is ridiculous. This is just insane. What it does point out, however, to our listeners and people who are in the attractions industry is you have to be prepared for the ridiculous, apparently. You have to make certain that, everything is chained, locked, padlocked, double locked, alarmed, to the point where, even someone who aggressively tries to get in, because it's not like if you know the park, you wouldn't just happenstance find yourself in a closed theater. Yeah. And Stanleyville Theater only has 2 entrances for guests, and then a backstage entrance. Now, I don't know whether he went in the backstage entrance or not. And if that's the case, that means you have to now lock your backstage entrances. And then I have to ask, if you have to keep all these doors locked, then what happens if you have people working in there and there's a fire situation? We are past the point of common sense here, in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah.
It is not negligence on the part of the park. It is not negligence. It is stupidity on the part of the guest. And again, I feel sorry for him. I feel very sorry that he made a really dumb mistake as a 12-year-old and will have to deal with it the rest of his life, because he got injured doing it. But to me, it's sort of like suing a bicycle manufacturer because their kid fell and hurt themselves, even though there was no malfunction on the bicycle. It was just that the child wrote, that the bicycle manufacturer should have taken into consideration that a child will ride a bike down a hill that's too steep with gravel at the bottom.
Yeah.
To me, it is past the point of being realistic or being logical. And what it's going to do is lawsuits like this, everybody's like, oh, the poor guest. But what they don't really take into consideration is how it's going to negatively impact thousands, if not millions of guests going forward across the industry, because everyone now is going to have to, put in these extra, first of all, they're going to raise their ticket price so that they can pay for the insurance to cover this kind of thing. Number one. Yeah. Number two, they're going to put in, all of these restrictions after restrictions after restrictions. So, for example, you won't be able to access the stage from the house, which means that you won't be able to have anybody come out into the house during a show, which is every 5-year-old's favorite part of any show at any theme park, is when the characters come out and mess with them. But you're not going to be able to do that anymore because you're not going to be able to be liable for 24 hours a day whether that space is accessible to a stupid 12-year-old, he's probably a very intelligent young person, but to a 12-year-old who wants to go in and illegally, in my opinion, jump on a trampoline.
Yeah.
So where does the responsibility, to me, this responsibility is past the point of logic. Now, again, not a lawyer, but it's just, I find it very frustrating. I find it very frustrating because it ends up hurting the industry as a whole. And I will tell you right now, in most organizations now, I have no idea whether United Parks and Resorts is going to do this or not. But in some cases, some parks will say, "Hey, just having a circus show, just having a trampoline is too much of a liability. Let's tear it down and put up a ride so that they can't sue us. They have to sue the ride manufacturer."
Yeah. See, that kind of stuff is a little bit more what I'm worried about. Is like, well, I don't know. Maybe it's incorrect, but I do feel like live entertainment always seems to be the thing that is very at risk, because it's like when sales go up and down, it's a thing that you can cut, because the ride is an investment or it's a capital plan, right? So it's a little bit harder to move the budget out at the wind changes direction, right? But you can scale up shows, you can scale down shows, and then I can just hear it now where they're like, well, now we're going to need extra security in this area, and we're going to need to do this and do that, and it's it's not worth having this, and you just hear you just hear it. It's not the same, but remember earlier this year when that young man got naked on It's a Small World in Disneyland, mm-hmm. and sat in the ride, and it also strikes me that we don't always design rides for bad intention, I guess, on that part, right? It's like to what degree do you design experiences as a whole for the worst possible thing a guest to do? And it's kind of like you're saying, you're punishing the entire everyone for something that is such
outside of reasonable expectations.
Outside of reasonable expectations, yeah. Like you wouldn't ever think, well, someone's going to get naked on this ride, and then while it's moving through water, jump off of it and get. I mean, that's like but now that they have permanent cast members that are stationed at points now in guest view, whereas previously they just used cameras, right? But now they have a new cast member that is stationed kind of in guest view to kind of, I guess, just be a deterrence. Essentially, they're just sitting there, mm-hmm. just staring at you, which isn't any different than the camera, but I think it's a more deterrent for the guests. So that also could be a thing. Maybe they're going to have to staff to make sure that there's a staff member at all times, in the theater.
Raising the price, which means it's either
more staffing,
which means it either becomes too much of a labor draw on their budget, so they close it, or they keep it but keep raising up the ticket price. Like I've said for years, I am shocked and amazed that we haven't gotten to the point of ridiculousness where Small World has a shoulder harness. Where you can't get up and get out. It boggles my mind that this is an issue. That's the thing. It boggles my mind that this is an issue. But again, I realize I'm from an era where the biggest responsibility for children fell to their parents. The biggest responsibility, or their caregivers, not just parents, but their caregivers. And if they made a stupid choice, then it was their responsibility, not the responsibility of everybody else. And I know that makes me sound really old-fashioned and really almost callous, but I can't say it enough. I feel sorry for this child. I wish he had not done it. I wish he had made better choices as a 12-year-old. I wish he had been raised to make better choices as a 12-year-old. And it's easy for me to point at the parents. I know that. That's what everybody's going to say. Oh, well, it's easy for you to say, you don't have any kids and blah, 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 blah. You're right, I don't. But I also know that when I was 12 years old, I would have loved to have gone in and jumped on a trampoline in a dark theater. But guess who didn't do it? Me, when I was 12. Because I was taught that was not something you do.
Well, Scott, I'm wondering, I mean, obviously you have intimate experience working in these parks from the operation and all, I mean, so many. For our listeners that are worried about this, what do you think that like our listeners could do if they're at a smaller attraction or a different attraction? Is this something they need to prepare for? Like kind of have something in their back pocket, or because it's not, if they're not, I don't know. What do you think? I think where do you think the ripples will be for parks that are not this park? Like for all the other listeners.
Well, I mean, obviously, if a jury is going to find that a closed theater, that equipment on a stage, which is not a public area, in a closed theater that a child was able to get into somehow, is enough to make the park liable for 65% of the medical costs, unfortunately, you're stuck between a rock and a hard place. Yes, you're going to have to, increase your security. You're going to have to lock down everything when not in use. You're going to have to, put, and everybody says, well, we'll just put gates up. Okay, well, then the child climbs over the gate. And it's still the park's responsibility because they didn't do their due diligence. What do we do then? Do we put razor wire on the gates? Well, then the child injures themselves because they got cut on the razor wire to prevent them from getting on the stage from hurting themselves. So what is, where does this stop? Where does this stop? I think is my biggest issue. And, for in the short term, yes, the takeaway I would say is if you have kids, if you have, anywhere from 5 to 12-year-olds, and let's face it, with content creators, 10 to 18-year-olds love to get into places they're not supposed to be, so that they can create content that gets them, more likes, more clicks, more followers. And it is not uncommon. There's several videos that we've seen of areas of Disney parks that have been closed for years that somebody found their way onto. They found their way onto Discovery Island or one of the old water parks or whatever, and took photos and video and blah 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 blah. They weren't injured, but if they had been, apparently they could have sued the parks for making it possible for them to, in essence, sneak into a closed section and get injured. It just, sorry, I just keep saying the same thing over and over again because it frustrates me.
Yeah, well, I mean, I knew you would have a strong opinion having worked in these, parks, right? But I think, I agree with you on all these points. I guess I'm just wondering, for our listeners, what we do about it.
Invite your friends' kids in. If there's something if there's something that could be potentially dangerous, invite your kids' kids in, and tell them, can you see if you can get up on this stage? Figure out how they do it. And then do something absolutely ridiculous that's going to impact the artistic integrity of the show, but will save you $5 million, apparently.
Well, I guess I would recommend that everyone be prepared to have this conversation if it comes up. And then just, it's not going to, usually this is a legal conversation, right? Like this is a conversation legal's going to have with the top leadership. But I would strongly suggest maybe that the operations and our entertainment team try and get into that meeting. We talked about this, before, like,
they're already in those meetings. They're already in those meetings. Every time I've worked in a park, either in the park as an employee of the park or as a contractor for the park, those kinds of safety meetings, entertainment's always involved in them. Always. This is something that I think is, in my opinion, and as I think you said it at the very beginning, part of the reason that this went all the way to trial is because I am certain. Well, I can't say I'm certain. I would wager, based on my experience in theme park in general, and not just with Busch Gardens, because this is long after I was gone. But I am certain that the whole reason if it went this far is because safety was saying this is 100% defendable. This is 100% justifiable. We did our due diligence. There were signs. Yeah. The door was closed. It was clearly not open for guests. And the courts found it a different way. So, yes, get your legal your legal group involved. But I can promise you that there was a discussion early on that said, this is justifiable. I used to have these discussions, and still do, with any Halloween experience that I put in. How dangerous can we make dangerous in quotes? How edgy can we get? And what goes past the line of what can be defendable in court if someone does something stupid. And because the intent, everybody loves to think that the intent of a theme park is to hurt people. Well, that is absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah.
So, this is almost as ludicrous. Let me put it outside the realm of entertainment. This is almost as ludicrous as a child got into one of the offices behind the scenes at the building. And at Busch Gardens, that's not difficult to do. You can get into human resources if you want to. Got into the human resources office, found someone's door who was open to their office, took a letter opener out, and started to play that game where you do the knife really fast around your hands and stab them in the back of the hand and then sued the park.
Yeah.
It's taking tools that are not in a guest area, using them in a way that should not be used, and then holding the park responsible.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I don't have anything to add.
Yeah. I mean, I guess my point is figure out, as far as takeaways go, figure out what you can defend, figure out what you feel you can defend, and then add another layer on top of it.
Yeah. And just be prepared.
Apparently the courts are not on our side. Now, having gone through this whole rant, I do have to say, just out of responsibility, I do not have all of the details of the court case. I do not have all of the minutia, but based on what I've read and based on what is presented here, my opinion stands. If there is an element that I am not aware of, I may change. I may change my opinion in the future. But at this point, I am so frustrated by guests, and especially young guests, who want to make it so that it's going to be difficult for anybody to enjoy a theme park.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it goes back to what we were talking about where, you just have to, I guess it's a little bit just people being able to play together. Is something I think that we're losing, that kind of ability, just with less commonplaces in America and less, you're just, people are less used to other people. They're less used to being around communal areas, and just unsure how to behave in these situations, I guess.
Well, the mass sense of entitlement. This is clearly a 12-year-old who felt entitled that they could go in and play on a trampoline in a closed area on a stage that was marked "Do not be on the stage."
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's. We have a few minutes left, but we would be remiss if we did not mention that Disneyland released its 70th anniversary details, and let's see. I was going to say I wasn't that excited, but I don't know. I mean, there are some things I'm excited about.
But again, it's 70th, Philip.
Yeah.
Disney's notorious for they will. I used to joke they once did an event because Donald got pants. I mean, it's.
Yeah, they
do.
70th. I mean,
so it's not really a milestone. It's important, but it's a way to celebrate to a certain extent.
Yeah, I think that's really what it is. The most interesting elements that are going to be part of this is the Walt Disney A Magical Life, which is a new presentation inside the Main Street Opera House, and it has the first audio animatronic figure of Walt, which I'm really excited. I think the concept art for that. We've known about this for a while, but we kind of didn't exactly have the opening date for that, and now it's aligned for the 70th anniversary, and I think that's really exciting. If it's the quality that we see in the renderings, this is going to be really cool especially at Disneyland, to be able to have. Definitely it's going to make those rumors about the cryo freezing probably come back, but it's going to be it'll be interesting. And then of course they're announcing the return of other items. So Paint the Night's coming back, Wondrous is coming back, which is great. People really enjoyed Wondrous. The ratings for Wondrous are higher than the shows that replaced it. And Paint the Night has been out of commission since the pandemic, and it was a phenomenal evening show. So, I'm excited for those elements of it, and overall, just more entertainment in that fashion to be coming back to the parks.
Yeah, I think the Walt audio animatronic is going to be exciting. There have been rumors that it's kind of going against what he actually really wanted.
Yeah.
But again, I didn't know Walt, so I can't make a comment on that. But I jokingly said when I first saw it, I was like, "Oh, good, somewhere for senior citizens to go sit in air conditioning," because it ain't gonna play with the kids. They couldn't care less.
Yep.
But those of us who were kids and saw, Walt sign off on the Wonderful World of Disney every week, it'll be a lovely bit of nostalgia for us, and hopefully we can share that with a younger generation. Gosh, I would come up with some clever way to end the show, but I can't. So we're done. Our time is up, and I took up so much of the show about ranting about people who shouldn't be where they shouldn't be. So I will stop that and apologize. I promise I won't get on those kinds of rants on the next show. But we just really appreciate you paying attention to us and listening to us, and hopefully we've made you think a little bit. And equally as importantly, hopefully you will join us for Green Tagged Unhinged, which is our Patreon show, which we'll be recording right after this, and boy, do we have things to talk about. So anyway,
Yes.
We will see you next week. Thank you very much. This is Green Tagged Theme Park in 30.
Yes, find our Patreon. Go to patreon.com/greentagged or just type green tagged into Patreon and we'll come up. Okay, thank you. Goodbye.